Alright, in this video we're going to be getting to know the user interface of the timeline just a little bit better. We're going to be covering all of the tools that you have access to on this side of the timeline panel as well as up here. There's a lot to cover with these tools, so let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to be going over is called toggle track output, which are these eyeball icons right here. So as you can see, we have my intro right here, and then right here we have a video of a hard drive. All this does is when you click it, it will disable that entire layer. So now we're not seeing anything that is on the V2 track. And now if I re-enable it, we can see the hard drive. And same thing down here. If I were to disable this, all we're gonna see is black because there's nothing underneath this video layer. So this can be useful if you're wanting to hide an entire track. Maybe you just have some effects or a bunch of video clips that you don't wanna see. You can just turn them off by toggling off this entire track. Do be warned though, if this is not on during export, none of those video clips are going to get exported. So before you export, make sure any of your tracks that you want back on are turned back on. All right, so next up, we're gonna be talking about what's called toggle sync lock, and that's all of these icons right down here. So normally what would happen if I were to delete this and then delete the gap is you saw everything moved over. All the audio and all the video and all the different layers moved over. So if I undo that and zoom out a little bit, delete, and then delete again, everything moves over on the track. Now with toggle sync lock, let's turn one of those layers off. So I'm gonna turn toggle sync lock off for this entire audio track right here. Now watch what happens. I'm gonna click delete, delete it again. Everything shifted over except the audio. So now for example, if I were to disable the sync lock on track 2, you'll notice the only track that's gonna move is this one on V1. Now this and this one stayed exactly in place. Now in this case, that would put my whole video out of sync because I have all this B-roll lined up with the audio, so that's not something I would wanna do. But if there are ever cases where you only want to move specific tracks, but not everything else, you can turn off the toggle sync lock and then those gaps will not move. So as one more example, on here we have this green clip right here, which is on V4. So if I disable that and delete the gap, you'll notice this never moves. So everything else shifted over except this. So if you don't want something to shift, you can turn off the sync lock. By default, all of the sync locks are always on, so everything will move whenever you shorten a gap. Next, we have track targeting, and that's all of these blue icons right here, and they say V1, V2, V3, and so on, as well as A1, A2, and A3. Anything with a V is referring to video, anything with an A is referring to the audio. If the track is blue, that means track targeting is enabled for that track, and if it's gray, it is disabled. To enable or disable, all you have to do is click on the track. So now there's quite a few scenarios where this comes in handy. The first example that I'm gonna give is if I wanted to copy and paste a clip. So maybe I come all the way over on my timeline and I copy this piece of text. And now I wanna paste it right above this clip here. If I were to hit Command V right now, it's going to paste, but it's gonna paste it on this bottom track right here and delete a bunch of my stuff. So I pasted, and now it cut off some of my clips. Well, I don't want that to happen, obviously, and doing something like finding an empty gap, pasting, and then moving it just isn't very efficient. So this is where track targeting comes in. If I were to paste, whatever the earliest track that's enabled is where the clip is going to paste. So in this case, V1 is the earliest track that I have enabled, which means it's gonna paste on V1. So if I wanted to paste on V4, which is above this clip, I can disable all of these, hit paste, and now it pasted right up here. Now if I wanted it to paste on V2, I could enable V2 and hit paste, and now it pasted. Now you can also map keyboard shortcuts to track targeting. So if I were to hit 1 on my keyboard, that will enable V1. If I hit 3, that enables 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Now by default, these aren't mapped to the number keys. So if you want to change that, you can come up to Premiere Pro, keyboard shortcuts, and then search toggle target. And this will give you all of the track targeting options. So you can see my video layers are set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and audio is set to option 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now if I ever copy something and want to paste it on the correct layer, I can turn off all the ones I don't want and then paste right away and put it on the one that I do want. Now there's also another setting in Premiere called selection follows playhead, which is up at sequence, and then right here. And with this on, anything that is underneath the playhead will be automatically selected by Premiere. So if I hover over this clip, automatically selected, you can see it's automatically selecting for me. I find this to be an incredibly handy feature, and if you want to turn it off, you can just go here and click it. But now why this is important for track targeting is if track targeting is not enabled for that track, it will not select anything on that track. So if I were to hover over here and now move back, you can see it's selecting the audio because video 1 is disabled, so it's not gonna select anything here. Now it'll select V3, but if I turn that off and go back, you'll see now V3 is not getting selected. So this is another area where track targeting is important. Now on our far left right here, we have toggle track lock, and that's just all of these lock icons right here. And you can pretty much guess what this does. If you turn it on, it's gonna lock the entire track. You'll have all of these diagonal lines going through, and now I cannot select or adjust anything for this track. I can't move them, I can't delete them. So a lot of times, if you don't wanna accidentally mess with something, people will lock their tracks so that they don't accidentally move or delete something. All right, now there's one more setting on the far left of this panel that you can't see all of the time. In order to be able to see this, you need to double click a clip in the bin and open it inside of your source monitor. And now you'll see we have another V1 and A1. Now this looks exactly identical to your track targeting, and you might think, well, isn't it just the same thing? And it's actually not. This is called source patching. And now what this is for is if you use the insert and overwrite commands while you're editing. So remember how we can set an in and out point, and now we can either drag the audio and video to the timeline and put it down there that way, or you can use the period and comma keys to paste it from the timeline down to here if you prefer doing it with a keyboard shortcut. So source patching is for if you use the insert and overwrite commands. And if you're going to use the source monitor to put clips on your timeline, I would highly recommend that you use the insert and overwrite commands. So remember, for track targeting, depending on what track was enabled, if I was to copy and paste something, that's where the track would paste. Well, it's the same thing for source patching. Right now, V1 and A1 are enabled, so if I hit insert, it's going to insert the clip right on V1 and A1. Now, if I want to paste above and below this for the audio, I can click right below and right above. And now if I hit the period key, it's going to go from the source monitor onto V2 and A2. So if I had a whole timeline right here full of B-roll and I wanted to put it all over top, I wouldn't want these two to be enabled. I would want to put that on top and bottom for source patching. So now that when I'm doing this, all of my clips that load in will go right above, because I don't want to overwrite any of these. So now remember, in order to see your source patching, the source monitor has to be enabled. Now here's one little problem that people who are new to Premiere frequently run into. If I disable the source patching for video and now try and drag in my audio and video, you'll notice only the audio came in, and that's because this is disabled. Now you'll notice if I disable the audio and enable the video, if I drag, only the audio comes with. So sometimes people accidentally turn these off and then they go, well, what the heck? My audio isn't coming with, or my video's not coming with. All you have to do to fix this is make sure that your source patching is enabled on both of the tracks. So there you go, that's source patching. All you have to remember is that track targeting is for while you're editing and kind of where you paste and move your clips to. Source patching is sending clips from the source monitor onto your timeline. Depending on which track you have enabled is going to decide where it goes from the source monitor onto your timeline. All right, so next up we have the audio tools on our timeline, and right here is just a microphone where when you click it, it will start letting you record a voiceover directly onto the track in Premiere. Now, if you right click on this track and click voiceover record settings, you can change the pre-roll and post-roll. So pre-roll means it's gonna count down 3 seconds after you click the button, and after those 3 seconds, you can start talking. You can either disable this if you want to start recording right away, or you can leave it enabled and change the number if you would like to have that. You can also change your microphone settings right here and rename your track if you want. If you ever want to see the name of your track, you can double click on the track in an empty gap and it will expand it, and now you can see the name. You can also do the same for video tracks. All right, next up on the audio tools, we have this S, which is for solo track. So you can see we have our music right here and then the sound from this clip. So if we play both of these together, you can hear them both. Now if I hit S, I'll solo just this audio. So if you're ever wanting to isolate just a couple sounds or maybe one sound effect on a track, you can just hit the solo button and listen that way. And now M is the exact opposite. This is just for mute track. And now a common mistake that a lot of people make is I will see them mute a bunch of tracks just so they can listen to one, and that's exactly what this solo track button is for. Instead of having to hit M on all of these tracks, you can just hit S on one of them. So keep that in mind, because I have seen a lot of veteran editors make that same exact mistake. And now we have these tools right here, and you'll get to this more later in the course, but these are for creating keyframes. So if I press this button, it will place a keyframe. If I move over, I can place another keyframe. And if I want to hop between the keyframes, you can hit these arrow keys to jump between them. Personally, I would never use these because there's a much better way to create keyframes as well as jump between keyframes, which we cover in the Creating Keyframes video. So check that out if you want to know more about those. Now, if you right click on a track, you're going to get a handful more options. You have rename, so you could rename this to label your tracks, which can help keep you organized. So I could name this one A-roll, and then I could expand the second track and name this B-roll. You could expand the third track and do graphics, and so on. Naming your tracks can just help you keep a little bit more organized. Now, if you right click again, you'll see a handful of options. You have add track, delete track, add tracks, delete tracks, and customize. If you go to customize, you can customize which buttons are inside of your track. If you really don't want to see one of these buttons, you can get rid of it or reset your layout back to normal. Personally, I just leave mine at the default. Now, if you ever want to add tracks, there's a couple ways you can do that. So you can see I only have a third layer right here. If I want to add a fourth, all I have to do is drag this clip up one layer and it will automatically add a fourth, and you can keep doing it that way. Or if you have to add a bunch of tracks at once, you can right click, add tracks, and now I can just type in a number. I could do 10 and it will tell you before first track, after video 6, or whatever track you want, and you can do the same with audio. So I'm gonna add 3 audio tracks and 10 video tracks. And now you'll see we added a whole lot more tracks. Now here's a little tip for you. If you hover over your tracks and hold shift and then scroll, you can expand all your tracks or you can close all your tracks. Same for audio. If I hover over the audio, I can close them all or expand them all. Now, if you want to open just one track without double clicking on it, you can hold down Option or Alt on Windows and scroll, and that will only expand that one track. Personally, I find it a little bit easier to just double click and open it though. All right, so that covers all of the tools in this timeline panel. Now let's come up to the top. This one right here, which is called Insert and Overwrite Sequences as Nests or Individual Clips, I actually have a full video that breaks down this feature as well as nesting, so go check out the What is Nesting video if you wanna know more about that. Next up, we have this magnet icon, which is for Snap in Timeline. And basically with this enabled, what'll happen is when you go to a clip, you see that black little line going down, it's a little magnet saying, hey, we're gonna stop you here because we think you wanna just connect it here. Now, if I were to disable this and move around, you can see that black line's not showing up. So it'll let me place this clip wherever I want. But now most of the time when you're moving clips around, you don't wanna try and measure everything perfect to a frame just to make sure it lines up and you don't overwrite anything. So if you enable the magnet, you'll have that snapping turned back on and you'll be able to see when you're connecting to a clip. Most of the time, you're gonna wanna leave this on. Next up, we have linked selection. And with this enabled, audio and video that came together will stay linked and you can move them around. But if you turn this off, now audio and video will move separately. So these were linked together, but now I can move them freely because this is off. And you'll notice there's this red little box with some numbers inside of it. And this tells you how many seconds and how many frames these are apart. So currently, this is 31 seconds and 4 frames apart from this audio. And if I move them closer, you'll see that number goes down. Now it's 17 seconds and 2 frames. If I move it again, 2 seconds and 15 frames. And then if I line them back up, it disappears. Again, this is something you're probably just gonna wanna leave on. And now next up, we have the marker button. You can click this and it will place a marker down on your clip or timeline. If no clip is selected, it will place a marker on your clip. You can also use the keyboard shortcut, which is M, to place markers. I'm gonna have a full video that breaks this down as well because there's a lot to cover with markers. But for now, that's what markers does, and you can place one on the timeline just by hitting M. All right, now we have our timeline display settings, which are under this wrench, and there are a lot of options in here. All of these right here are pretty self-explanatory. If you wanna see your video thumbnails on the timeline, you can click this and it will turn them off, or you can leave them on. Show video keyframes, you should always leave this on. Same with audio keyframes. Show video names, I leave this on, which is just this name right here. And for show audio names, I leave this off. It's purely preference whether you want this on or off, so either way works. Next up, we have show clip markers, and if we had placed some markers and then we turned this off, you will not see your markers on the timeline. So if you ever place some markers but you can't see them, make sure to check your timeline display settings and then enable this if it's disabled. All right, so next up we have show duplicate frame markers, and this is actually a really cool feature. So I'm gonna duplicate this clip by holding down Option on a Mac or Alt on Windows, and then dragging it to the right. And now notice, a blue line went straight through this as soon as I did that. And what this color means is that, hey, there's another clip on your timeline that is using these exact same frames. So if you had some B-roll you were using for a project, sometimes you get an edit that's just big enough where you're not sure if you've already used that shot. Well, if you see this line, you know you've used that shot before. But now watch this. If I were to shrink this shot over here, you'll see the blue line disappeared on part of the clip because this part of the clip is no longer being duplicated anywhere else. And it's only this portion of the clip right here. So this can be really helpful telling you exactly which frames of the clips are being duplicated somewhere on your timeline. Now, if I duplicate another shot, you'll see that the color is different. That way you can find out which colors match the shot that's been duplicated. But do be warned, after you've duplicated 10 clips, the colors will start to repeat. So show duplicate frame markers can be really helpful in spotting duplicate frames on your timeline. By default, show duplicate frame markers is turned off. All right, so next we have show through edits. Now, if I were to place a couple cuts on this, you'll see you can see the cut where the little black line is. And now if I enable show through edits, you'll see there's these little arrows connecting. And what these are saying is, hey, you placed a cut on a clip that could all be one clip. So right here, if someone came onto this timeline and saw all these cuts, they're not gonna know at a glance without that on that this is all one clip. They might think these are all separate shots. Well, you can see that it would all be one shot if it's enabled. And now if you wanted to move all of these around and you didn't make any changes, it would be a really big pain, highlighting all of these and then moving it around or moving them one by one. So what you can do if you want to restore all of this and get rid of these cuts on the single clip is you can hold down Command on a Mac or Control on Windows and then highlight all the cuts and hit your delete key. And this will get rid of all of those cuts, assuming that there's been no changes in between those cut points. So for example, if I place some cut points and then I change the speed of this clip to 20%, you can't rejoin this cut point because the speed has been changed here. So the speed over here is 100%, but over here it's 20%. So you can't rejoin that. But if the clips are all the same and there hasn't been any speed changes, you can highlight all of these, delete, and everything rejoins. By default, join through edits is off as well. All right, next up in the list is show FX badges, and that's just this little FX badge right here. When there's no effects applied to your clip, it's gray, but now if you apply any adjustments to the position, scale, or rotation, that badge will turn yellow. If I undo those, it'll go back to gray, and now if I apply an effect from here like Lumetri Color, that badge will turn purple. Now, if you have a clip that has an effect on it as well as changed the position, scale, or rotation, that badge will turn green to let you know that a combination of those have been applied together. And now the last badge color you can have is when there's a red underline underneath this. So if I select this clip, we have our effects control panel, and if I go over to the master and now drag the Lumetri Color inside of there, you'll see that this badge turns red. So now what this means is you've applied a master clip effect. So if I go over to the master tab and change this, it's going to change it everywhere inside of Premiere. So I just raised the exposure up by 3 stops, and now that adjusted in the source monitor, on the timeline, and in my bin. So if you ever want to have an effect on your clip and you want it to apply everywhere in the project, then you can do it by applying a master clip effect. And that's noted by showing you a red underline underneath your FX badge. All right, next, this is enabled by default, but we have composite preview during trim, which is a mouthful. But if I were to take this clip and start dragging it, you'll notice in the program monitor, we can see 2 little views. The left clip is the one that is currently being adjusted, and you can see the time being adjusted on it. And this is telling you how much you have shortened or extended the clip. And then to the right of that is the beginning of this clip right here. So if I go to the beginning, you can see it's a picture of that hard drive right there. So if I'm dragging this out, on the right, you'll see the start of that shot, and on the left is the clip that you're adjusting. So I'm gonna drag in a clip that actually has some movement in it so you can see this. So let's put this one in here, place a cut, and now we'll adjust this. So if I move this, you can see that the left shot is moving, and this is showing you what the last frame of that shot is gonna be. So I'm gonna go where you just barely see the SanDisk, and now if I go right here, you can see it's exactly how we had just edited it, where you can barely see the word SanDisk. If I drag it out, it's black because there's no clip against this, but once it's against this, you can see the other shot that's incoming. So that's all composite preview during trim is. It just lets you see more information up in your program monitor. And now getting to the end of this finally, we have minimize all tracks, which will minimize all the tracks on the timeline, or you can expand all your tracks, or you can use these presets. So for example, if you know you always want some tracks expanded and others minimized, you can set it up however you want. So let's say you wanted V2, B1, and Audio 1 always expanded, you could set those up exactly how you want them, then go down to Save Preset, and you can save this as a track height preset. And then you assign it to one of these track height presets. And once you've done that, you can go up to Premiere Pro, Keyboard Shortcuts, and then search track height, and you can map a shortcut to those presets. So that way, if you ever wanna quickly adjust all of your tracks at once, you can just map keyboard shortcuts to it and do it that way. If I do Command T, that's going to minimize all of my tracks for me. And you can see that I have that set up right here, and I named that one Minimized Tracks. If you wanna manage your presets, you can click Manage Preset, and you can change which one they're assigned to, or you can delete them. And then lastly at the bottom here, we have Customize Video Header, which we already went over. That's just where you right click inside of here and then click Customize. You have that for both audio and video. So there you guys go, that is all of the tools inside of the timeline panel. I know there were a lot of tools, but getting to know these can be extremely beneficial for your editing. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to let me know.